Check 1, 2. Check 1, 2. All right. Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the chapel at Woodmont Christian Church. My name is Clay Stauffer. I'm the senior minister here, and I'm joined by Samar, my friend, a research professor at Vanderbilt and Vanderbilt Law School. She's also the founder and head of A Million Conversations, and as well as the co-chair of the Project on Unity and American Democracy at Vanderbilt, along with Bill Haslam, John Meacham, and John Geer. We had Samar here this past fall. The awful attack happened October 7th, and then we held an event in here on October the 18th to try to have some conversation about it. And so tonight she's come back to continue that conversation on a host of topics. And I'm going to welcome her in just a second. But I'd love if you would, let's begin with a prayer. Welcome those that are joining us on the live stream, as well as everybody that's here at the church tonight. Let's say a short prayer. Loving God, we come to you grateful for the chance to learn, to grow, also mindful of all the events that are happening across our globe where lives are being lost and where peace is not happening. Be with us tonight as we talk about some of these things. Thank you for Samar, for her experience, her intellect, her willingness to share with us, be present with us, open our hearts, open our minds. I pray this in Christ's name. Amen. So like I said, the last time she was here was just about a week and a half after the October 7th attack, and we had a dialogue that night along with the chair of the Jewish Studies Department at Vanderbilt. Ari was here with us. But I kind of want to pick up, and we're going to be covering Gaza, Israel, then we're going to go to Ukraine, what's happening with Russia and Ukraine, and then we're going to talk some about immigration in this country and the different issues that are shaping up for this presidential election. So we got plenty of ground, and then Jay will be coming around with the mic, and we'll have questions at the end. So first of all, let's welcome Samar Ali back to Woodmont.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Can you go ahead and I'm asking the question, so she's going to be talking. Can you give us
conversation? Yeah.
Can you give us an update on where things stand in Gaza at this point? What is the latest? Where do things stand, and how do you see it?
Yes. Well, first off, as always, thank you again for having me back, and thank you. And I was telling Clay yesterday, he always asks the right questions. And I mean, and so much of this is asking those right questions. So I always know that I'm going to leave. I'm going to take several deep breaths throughout the evening, and I'm going to leave in a good kind of exhausted because not only he but you all ask really good questions. So I always look forward to these conversations or whatever you want to call them together. So I'll say, I'm just going to tell you, I'll answer the question, but I'll just say this. I am surprised. I am surprised by where we are, and I'm concerned. And what I mean by where we are is just in terms of where we are as a society right now. And in terms of in terms of where we're seeing leadership taking us, and however you want to think about leadership. It's not only one person that I'm talking about. I'm just thinking about leadership in general. So as I'm reflecting on where we are, part of what I'm asking and wondering is, why are we here? Why are we at this point? Why are we not at a different point? Because I know we're not at a good point. So I don't have good news for you this evening, and I like good news. And one of my longtime childhood friends is in the audience, Haley Hovius. I didn't know she was coming tonight, but we have known each other, and she knows me very well. I always look for the positive. I'm the optimist. I want to see that good news. And what's weighing me a bit is that there's too much bad news at once, and so it's feeling more and more like a perfect storm. So one of the things I'm going to try to help us do tonight together is to figure out and think through what are some of those pathway forwards that we as citizens in this country can maybe identify to get on a positive pathway forward, because I don't want us to continue towards this downward spiral. So sorry for that opening, because it's a bit doom and gloomy, but just to say, as I was driving in here, driving to join you this evening, I received the news, as has been, it's all over the news right now, that Prime Minister Netanyahu has rejected a ceasefire deal. And some of what was being negotiated there would have been the release of the hostages. There are remaining 136 hostages of the original 240 that were kidnapped on October 7th, just a few days before we met here together. And that also means one of the requests in response to those hostages being released were 1,500 Palestinian prisoners, 500 of whom are serving life sentences in prison. And also in Gaza, we are looking at the death count of 27,700 people, the majority of whom are women and children, and 67,000 have been injured, and thousands more are missing and presumed dead. And 224 Israeli soldiers have been killed since the ground invasion started in this war, and also 30 of the remaining 136 hostages have been killed. 3 have been confirmed to have been killed by the Israeli military ground operations, and also there are several investigations ongoing right now as to why some were and what were the causes of death inside the tunnels that were built by Hamas underground in Gaza. And I'm not even getting into the number of people who are starving right now, who are lacking access to resources, and including, as a two-time mother myself, including mothers who are undergoing cesarean sections in C-sections in the hospitals without anesthesia. And who, after 4 hours of having a C-section, are being back on the streets. This is very serious. And I will say also, what concerns me, too, is what does this mean for democracy? And what does it mean when we're seeing this type of, level of brutality? And remember, we have talked about this before, but authorizing environments for brutality through that is part of which is being enabled by in the name of democracy. What does that mean in a time period when we are arguing, and of which, by the way, I agree that democracy is the best form of governance? What does that mean when it's yielding, in the name of democracy, is yielding these results?
So when you were here in October, there was a lot of outrage over what happened in Israel. Yeah. There was a lot of sentiment, that this is awful, this is terrible. Israel has to defend itself. A lot of people that feel that way. Is it safe to say that because of many of the things you just said, that the global opinion has significantly changed to a belief that the Israeli retaliation has been too much, and that we're not paying attention to a lot of the things that you just listed, and that it's too much. It's not to scale by any means.
Yeah, I think people are heartbroken. I really think people are heartbroken. I think people are feeling disoriented. They're feeling outraged. They're feeling empathy. They're feeling scared, depending on who and where they are. I think a lot of Israelis and Palestinians are not feeling safe. And I think that a lot of Jewish Americans and Arab Americans and Muslim Americans in our country are not feeling safe right now. I think many white Americans and black Americans are not feeling safe. I think a lot of people are really feeling this sense of true insecurity. And so there's a lot of communal trauma that we're feeling. But I want to say that people keep talking about these two sides, Israelis versus Palestinians, or Israelis versus Hamas. And one of my Israeli American friends recently, I think, put it best. And she said the two sides are those who are for peace and those who are for conflict. Those are the two sides. So are you for peace or are you for ongoing violence and conflict? That is not to say that it's peace just without terms. And that's not what peace means. When you prepare for peace, peace requires accountability. It requires justice. It requires an adherence to a norms-based international order or rule of law. So I just want to make sure that I'm clear on that. It's not to just sort of say that we kind of just go back to the status quo of where we continue to enable authorizing environments for violence and we're fine. No, it's to find a different pathway forward. And so what I will say is this, and feel free to cut me off, but is just simply that I think that what we're seeing is a shift in the conversation. A shift in the conversation and an evolution of the conversation to an evolving conflict of where you have crimes against humanity that are being committed by what I'll say are conflict profiteers. You have war crimes that are being committed, and innocent lives that are being lost that are preventable. These are preventable losses.
So can you share those numbers again in terms of the casualties and also I think you had an update in terms of the hostages, and have some of those Israeli hostages been killed by Israeli airstrikes?
That's correct. And so I think there's a lot of reasons that it's important to reflect on that, including what is the rhetoric inside Israel right now, and thinking about how Israeli citizens are responding to their own government because of this, and including another rejection of a ceasefire that could have resulted in the release of the remaining 136 hostages. And so we've seen a little over 100 hostages released, but there's still 136 who are being held against their will as hostages. And so I think that I'll just take a step back on this and say what I'm also increasingly surprised by, which I mentioned when we were together last October, is that we're not taking a moment to really get the facts and to gather the evidence and to follow a rule of law based process and system. So when we throw that out the window, what do we have? We end up having chaos. And we definitely don't have democracy. And so if you hear me again and again saying, what are the facts? Where is the evidence? What is the process? What is the due process of law looking like? And it's because I'm going back to basics. How many of you all have read the book Checklist by Atul Gawande? I highly recommend it. He actually talks about in moments of chaos and disorientation, we tend to forget the basics, which is why we need to go back to our checklist. And so I think it's kind of going back to a checklist in an instance like this, which is what are the basics? And that is, I think, going to and saying, what are the facts? What do we know? What do we not know? What are we certain of? What are we not certain of, but we need more information to gather certainty around? How long will that take? Communicating that to people, I think, is important. To go through the numbers, 27,700 people have been killed in Gaza since October, 67,000 have been injured, and thousands more are missing and presumed dead. 224 Israeli soldiers have been killed during the ground invasion. 240 Israeli hostages were captured on October 7, 2023. 30 of the remaining 136 hostages have been declared as of the past 24 hours. Their families were informed that they have been confirmed dead, and 3 of those hostages were killed by the Israeli military during its ground operations, and several of those other hostages is being investigated as to the cause of their death.
So one of the headlines that I read before coming down to the dinner tonight was that Netanyahu was rejecting the ceasefire because, quote, victory is within reach. So my question is, from Israel's standpoint, what do they think victory looks like? And then my follow-up question to you is, what do you see happening from this point forward?
So I have been hearing the victory within reach line for several months now. So I really would like to understand. I was in a meeting in early November where someone was saying that too, in Washington D.C., and that was now 3 months ago. And someone said that they thought that victory would be accomplished within 5 days. So what I would just say is, I think we need to get specific. I'm going to do my best. I'm not always going to succeed in being as specific as possible, but I still am going to say I think that that's the standard that we should try to adhere to. What does victory mean? And I think that as Americans, given that so much of our, I think that whenever, and it's not just with Israel, I think whenever our goodwill and our taxpayer dollars are going to any other nation state, we deserve to have clarity on how it's being used. I think that is, again, basic, and I think that is common sense. And so I don't think that anything that I'm asking for right now is outrageous. But what surprises me is that it's not being done.
What do you see happening as we move ahead? More of the same? It's hard to even ask that question, but what?
We need answers. I think what it is that we need answers. I think the thing is saying, okay, this is problematic.
Is this administration not asking for answers, not looking for them? What?
I think that we will be writing, and historians like John Meacham will be writing about this moment for years to come and analyzing it and understanding. I do have friends in this administration, and I am watching many of them go through this with experiencing a lot of anguish and a lot of trauma. And it's hard for me to, I keep using the word trauma, but there really is, people are traumatized by this, including people in our own government, who are, I think, obviously we're experiencing a crisis, and are trying to respond to it, but it's very reactionary. And so my request as an American citizen is to say, can we be more proactive? What does being proactive in this moment of crisis look like? How do we stop being so reactive and reacting? And how do we lead? And what does leadership in this moment look like? What have we learned from our past? And what can we do right now? And then to get on a different footing than the one that we're currently on, that allows also for the world to say, America is leading as the superpower, and democracy is working in the sense of democracy being a form of government that supports the concepts of freedom and liberation and safety and security and rule of law, and consistency, and predictability, and a lot of these different things that I know we're being tested on right now. But again, going back to it, there's some basic concepts here that I think we need to demonstrate our abilities to deliver on in this critical crossroads that we're finding ourselves in between, because a lot of people are looking right now and saying, democracy, is that the right way? Or is authoritarianism a better way? Because at least that there's stability and security through authority. I'm hearing this, by the way, in halls of power around the world of where I'm the one at the table who's arguing for democracy, and I'm looking around and I'm not having too many people arguing that with me, which is very frightening.
Any other thoughts on what leading looks like?
Other than that, how was the play, Mrs. Lincoln?
Exactly. But Samar Ali is in the cabinet. What else? What does it look like to lead, to be more proactive in this situation?
I keep making this point is that it is. I really think that anywhere we are giving aid, not only to Israel. If we are giving aid to any country, or we are selling, or we are allowing, or we are engaging, or we are a party to arms being traded to any country, we have to really hold them accountable for what they are doing in arguably our name. And I would start with that. I would just say, like, this is we're going to be very serious about that. We're going to do audits. I mean, and I'm using this as a layperson's term here, but we're going to audit everything that we have paid for, that is going to you. We want to understand, because that's what we would do if you were engaging as a company or as an individual with somebody else that you were giving that amount of money to. Because we give a lot of money to a lot of different countries, wouldn't you want to make sure that it was being used for what you are contracting it to be used for? I think so. And I think that the other thing too is that I would do is start predicting actions, and I would use media, and I would use the access to media in a way of where people are, instead of, again, going back to this point of like, well, we're reacting to the narrative frame in a very complex information ecosystem right now. I would start putting our own narrative frame on this, on the global, just not only on Israel and Palestine, but on global affairs in general. And again, I feel like we're constantly responding. And I will just say I mentioned this last time too, we have a serious disinformation problem, and we have a misinformation problem, and we have people who are conflict profiteers, again, who are looking to see how they can take advantage of this situation to gain power in a number of different ways, both on domestic issues in our country and on foreign policy related issues.
Can you say a word about Iran's role in all of this, and especially what's happened over the past couple of weeks with, well, I guess multiple weeks, but with the attacks and proxy battles and the Houthis and all of that?
So just on that, 3 American soldiers were killed 2 weeks ago, and in response to that, the U.S. killed a Hezbollah commander in Baghdad in Iraq, and so I think that that's also worth noting, because this is not this conflict is not contained. And it is spreading. We're seeing it happening. We're seeing attacks on the Red Sea. As you said, Iran-backed Houthi militants fired 6 anti-ship ballistic missiles in the past 72 hours. And they said they're going to escalate this unless aggression against Gaza ends. Jordan is feeling pressure. A lot of pressure right now, is worried about destabilization. Lebanon is very worried, not only the southern part of Lebanon, but up to Beirut and also other parts of Lebanon too. And Saudi Arabia also has weighed in, and they said no deal. That they're not interested. They were speaking to, they were talking about a peace agreement with Israel before October 7th, and they've now said that they will not enter into any further negotiations on that until it's agreed that to a Palestinian state that's along the 1967 borders, which includes East Jerusalem. And they also called out a specific person on the in that letter that they were irritated with on the U.S. national security side. It was a slap in the face to us diplomatically, and that Saudi Arabia is supposed to be our ally, and Iran is not. So we are, again, we're not in a great situation here. What I will say is Iran, it is still, we're watching them very closely to see their reactions of when things are happening, to see how much they're willing to escalate, because it seems like right now they're not willing. They have not escalated it to becoming a full-blown war into Lebanon and other parts of the Middle East. So that's one thing that I will say, but that doesn't mean that they won't do that tomorrow.
I want to shift and talk about Ukraine. Okay. You were here 2 years ago. We're coming up on 2 years since Russia invaded Ukraine, and a lot of what's been lost with the Gaza situation is the news and reports on what's happening in Ukraine. That war is coming up on 2 years. Where do things stand now? What's happening as of this moment? Can you give us kind of an update on where you see things? Where's the U.S. support? That's clearly going to be a big issue in this election year.
Yes, so Zelensky is has told us many times that they're running out of ammunition, they're losing ground, and that Russia is great, which means Russia is gaining ground, and that they're desperate for more of our support, and we're in the middle of an election year. And we just saw a bill that didn't make it through that would have given more support, but Schumer is going to introduce a new bill that's specifically trying to get more support to Ukraine. And so I think we don't yet know. So I don't want to say one way or the other, because I think that we just don't know.
What do you say to the people that will ask the question, how long can we continue to pump money into Ukraine? At what point is enough, or is enough never enough because of what's at stake?
Do you remember what we talked about 2 years ago? This
maybe.
This was it. What I said was we have to determine our appetite. Remember that?
Yeah.
I was saying, what is our appetite for this? And we need to just have a hard conversation with ourselves. And we've seen this in other conflicts and other wars too. Can we sustain the support towards victory? If not, how do we convey that with clarity? Is what I'm saying too much? I'm genuinely asking that, because I think that people have different points of view on that. I will give you an example. I'll give you two quick examples. On Syria, for example, and during the Syrian conflict, a lot of members of the Syrian opposition were holding out for U.S. support to defeat Assad. It never really came. It never really materialized. Assad is still the president of Syria. Some don't recognize him, but most of the world does. And I remembered sitting there with Syrian opposition leaders and thinking to myself sometimes, like, they kept trying and asking and trying to think through, how do we get U.S. support? And I was thinking to myself, are you calculating your victory based on U.S. support? If you are, oh dear. And Taiwan, similar. Sorry, that's not the news that everybody wants to hear. Again, because if you want liberation and you want freedom and you want to have hope, but I think it needs to be anchored in what that pathway to victory looks like, based on facts and based on sobering reality, because that's how you're actually going to get to victory. So that's what I was saying 2 years ago, if you remember. I was like, what is our appetite for this? Because if Ukraine is going to defeat Russia and it is dependent upon us to do so, we need to be honest with ourselves about what we're willing to endure.
Do you think Europe needs to step up and play a bigger role?
Europe always needs to step up. Okay, sorry, Europeans. Sorry, just I just got to get a jab in. Sorry. I would say Europe's not a monolith either. I mean, this is what I found. I never felt more humbled, I will say that, than when I was working in the government, and one of my assignments was to help to be on the negotiations team between the U.S. and EU on a security agreement. It was called the Passenger Name Records Agreement. And I got my list of all the different parties in the different European Union, of the countries that make up the European Union, and the UK was a part of it at the time. And I was just like, I did not realize how much I did not know, and I promise you, I paid attention in my EU law class, my EU political science class at Vanderbilt, and so all of that is just to say, Europe is as a lot of different conglomerates like it is fragmented. And I think that it's also trying to find its place, just as we are right now. I mean, we're 3,000, if you heard me say this before, we're 3,142 counties that make up the United States. Each one of those counties has a government, has a county executive, for example. We've got our rural and urban issues too. We've got people who are thinking about this, who are in a scarcity mindset and not a growth mindset. And they're fearing the other. And I think the same thing is happening. Very similar conversations that are happening in the United States right now are also happening in Europe.
So whatever happens in the election this year is going to play a huge role in how things play out in Ukraine.
Yeah, it already is.
Right.
It already is politicized at this point in a different way than it was 2 years ago.
But even in the Republican Party, there are two different mindsets. Nikki Haley says we got to continue to support them. Donald Trump says enough's enough. We can't do that.
Right.
The Biden administration still wants to support them, but if you can't get bills through, so what's your answer to the question, what is our appetite for seeing this through?
I think that we're beginning to see signs that we don't have the appetite. That doesn't mean we won't have the appetite tomorrow. But I think what we're seeing is, again and again, people are saying, hold on a minute, 1 in 5 Tennesseans goes to bed hungry right now. Why is that the case? And we're sending all of this support overseas.
And so do you think that that's something Putin was banking on when he went in, that ultimately the U.S. would grow weary and
not only Putin and others, not only Putin. I mean, that's the thing. I think that people are just sort of we are being analyzed by so many different intelligence agencies that I think it would make our heads spin if we thought about it too much.
Let's talk a little bit about this election year. Well, actually, first I want to talk to you about immigration, because immigration is all over the news. It's talked about all the time. It's always an issue. Yeah. It's politicized for sure, but it also seems like it is a big deal. Our inability to close our borders. A lot of people would say our unwillingness to close our borders. All the migrants showing up in cities, people being bused to sanctuary cities. Why is immigration such an elusive topic in American politics? I hear people say, well, both sides want to use it to their advantage, right? But we seem unable or incapable of being able to do things to make it better. Why is that?
I think it's a complex for different reasons. I think it also goes back to that what I had said earlier about, do you have a scarcity mindset or a growth mindset? So is there enough water for all of us or not? And so if we don't feel that there is, and we have other people who are coming in, and we haven't taken care of the people who are already here, I think a lot of people are saying, well, hold on a minute, how's this going to work? And we're not the only country that has that that's having that conversation. This is every country almost has that conversation. In Jordan, for example, which is facing 50% unemployment, and Jordan was asked to take more refugees, and they said we just can't. Lebanon, the same thing. And so I think it gets to here. It just gets to the heart of what we are experiencing in our own country and what we have come to terms with and been able to provide relief around. I think that's one. I think two is that it gets to, let me give an example that we're all living through right now. And how we have had a lot of Californians come into Nashville recently,
A lot of Californians.
Yeah, and New Yorkers too. And we see it on the roads and the driving and the this and the that and et cetera. And it's just like, what? We have customs, we have norms, we have ways about going about things as Nashvillians and Tennesseans, and then there are these new people who are coming in, and we're just like, and it's just sort of like, this is interesting. They dress differently. They talk differently. They do the restaurant thing differently. Anyway, I'll stop. But just to say, there is tension that can arise when people have different customs and different, and I think it takes time too. And I argue always that I think process, I'm a lawyer, but I think process and deliberate community building activities help for people who are coming in new to a community to integrate together in healthy ways of where everybody benefits. And I don't think we're getting the chance always to do that, given how we are doing immigration in America today. So I almost want to say, again, you know me, how do we shift the conversation into a new conversation of where we figure out more people winning than it feeling like it has to be a zero sum? That is not, I've been to the border. When I worked in government, part of my portfolio was at Homeland Security, which included the northern and southern border, and security and thinking through our security apparatus and security systems on those borders. We could spend an entire day just talking about that. I was, again, humbled and fascinated by what I did not know. And being in San Ysidro, being in El Paso, on the border with Texas, with the United States and Mexico, and seeing the barbed wire, and also seeing how our computer systems are working. And I will just say this from a safety and security standpoint, and to just say this, three quick things. One is, when people are coming in and out of your country, you do need to, including when U.S. citizens are leaving, from a security standpoint, you do want to know that. And so that's that. Going back to basics, those are basics. That's important. Number two, how much trade is happening across our borders between us and Canada and Mexico? They're our top trading partners. So how do we make sure we're not losing sight of that too? If we're even talking about shutting down the border, what does that mean economically for us? And then also, third is that we have drugs. We have drugs coming in and guns going out. And so Mexico's complaining about the gun sales coming from the United States right now into Mexico. And I will just say this on the drug side. I think that we focus on supply. We also have to talk about demand. And so let's have an honest conversation around that and just say, where are we today? And how about we have some bipartisan ownership of that and figure out a way forward that's going to make all of us safer and also healthier?
So can you say a word about this situation that's kind of played out with the Supreme Court and Governor Abbott in Texas, and many people are confused because they say, well, the Biden administration is supposed to secure the border. If they won't do it, then why can't Abbott do it? Why would they rule and say, you can't secure your own border, and then you have all the other governors that are standing with them? What's going on there? Because people are very confused that are watching.
I think again, and that's a much longer conversation, but I would just say that it gets to federal versus state jurisdiction. And what the Supreme Court came down and said in a 5-4 decision was that it's federal jurisdiction. It's not state jurisdiction. So you've got to allow the U.S. border, you got to allow CBP and Border Patrol access, and that they're in charge. So if you have confusion around who's in charge and who has jurisdiction, it actually can backfire because it creates confusion in an area where you do not need more confusion. So I think that gets to a bigger issue too, this is the states' rights and federal versus states' rights, and then also us being a republic and people thinking about, well, and I think there's tension too, just being honest about it, like that just observationally between people who are local and living it and getting frustrated with people who are making the decisions who are in a bubble in Washington, D.C.
Right. And so then you get the busing and send them to the sanctuary cities, send them to Martha's Vineyard, and let's see how you deal with it, because you have the stance, but you're not living it every day. Let me ask you this. I want to talk about this election year a little bit, and then I want to open it up for questions.
Is it an election year? Just joking.
Yes, it is.
Didn't notice.
The church does great during election years, too. It's great. All right. What are, from your perspective, what are the top 3 issues that you see, the most prevalent issues in this election, 2024 presidential election?
I think and I'm going to leave time for questions. I think it's different depending on what state you live in, what community you're a part of. So I don't think that there are just 3 issues. I think like for people who identify primarily with this community, it's going to be 3 issues. With people who are identifying with that community, it's going to be those 3 issues. But if I had to just sort of like answer the question, I would say, without the nuance, which is hard for me to do sometimes, I definitely, as you said, I think immigration is going to be one of them, and that includes border security. I think the Second Amendment, again, is back there in terms of our guns going to be taken away from us, and that which links to freedom. And I think in gun identity and in many people's minds. And so I think the second thing, and I think the third thing is going to be overarching, which we also hit on, and that is our support for overseas in operations and engagements when we are at home not feeling whole. And I think, again, just 3 key things that are going to connect into all these different issues, and is kind of like is corruption and hypocrisy. That's what you'll see with guns as well. We moved from guns primarily in the 80s and early 90s to being associated with hunting primarily, to people feeling they needed that in order to feel safe.
And you would put all those up ahead of the economy?
Well, like I said, the scarcity mentality. So I think the scarcity mentality is tied directly to the economy. Okay. And the guns are connected to that, and immigration and border is connected to that. All 3 of those issues are connected to the economy.
All right, Samar, you're an attorney. Can you comment on the legal gauntlet that Trump has to run in this election year, and the odds that he gets through that or doesn't? And then the follow-up question is, do you think Nikki Haley, who's the only other person running on the Republican side, stays in the race for a long time or doesn't?
Yeah, I'm fascinated by this. I am definitely fascinated by the Trump era. It is, there's no other word for me other than just say it's fascinating. And so, I think, and I could be wrong, but from where things are looking right now, it seems like he's going to use delay tactics to run the clock out up until the election. And then if he's elected, he'll dismiss the cases, and so against him. So it's looking like that's what me and I've talked about this with some other law professors at Vanderbilt, and everybody I've spoken to seems to think the same thing as far as how things are looking right now. And then I think Nikki Haley is not. I mean, this is not a new headline. Not a headline that hasn't been written yet. Is not doing well. So she's not performing well. And Trump's, as you've said before, Trump's base is really loyal, and she's not able to break through that. I mean, we saw what happened in Nevada.
Do you see, there's been a lot of talk about like no labels or a third-party candidate getting on the ticket. Many people say if it's going to be a Biden-Trump election, that this would be a year for a third-party candidate. I don't know enough about how that happens or if it could happen, but it seems like there could be an appetite for that to happen this year.
There's an appetite, but the moment won't be met because it takes time to build the infrastructure that's required for that third party to be successful. So it's too late. There's an appetite, but the food's not there. And so to grow anyway, I will stop my analogy. But just to say that on that, I think, there are people who study this, that study when a third party will be successful. And from some of the experts that I've spoken to on this, they've said that they think that we'll start to see a third party gaining ground realistically in 2026. Not in 2024, and in a presidential election, most likely in 2032. 2032. So that's kind of like the length of time that it will take in order for the infrastructure to be built for a third party to be successful.
What does it say about our system and our politics that we might be looking at a repeat election, two octogenarians, people that they say, a majority of Americans say they don't want a repeat election, but that is most likely what we're going to have. What does that say about our democracy, about our system, about where we are?
Well, you've heard me say this before, and I thought about, again, here's my hope. We, the people of the United States of America, it comes back, going back to basics, it comes back to that. I think what gives me hope is us. And so I think we have to shift our focus, and we have to take back power as the people. And we have to, that means shifting our focus. We don't have to give them all of our attention. We actually don't. We can begin also building civic infrastructure like you do at this church. And so many good things happen when we come together. And I really believe we've got to do that. And if we do it and we do it and we do it and we multiply it and we show the power of being an American by believing in we the people, and we demonstrate what democracy means to us, we're going to survive, we're going to get through it, we're going to get through it together, and we're going to find ourselves finding solutions to problems that the entire world is riddled by right now.
We could talk all night, but I do want to save some time here for questions. So Jay is going to come around. If you have a question, and please ask a question, put your hand up. Jay will bring the microphone to you. But it's a question on either topics we talked about tonight: Gaza, Ukraine, immigration, American politics, and the election year. So put your hand up. And Jay is also maybe going to look online too. So
we have a couple of questions online, and the first one comes from. Oh, go ahead.
Can I just add one thing? Is on the Trump legal challenges, because I just think that there's so much just information like scattered everywhere. Just to give you the count, right now there are 91 felony counts against Trump across 2 state courts and 2 different federal jurisdictions. So federal district courts. 91.
And there are people that believe the election interference case will go to trial this spring.
Yeah, but again, the delay tactics, just how it works.
All right, Jay.
Yeah, one of our online viewers, Barrett Sutton, is watching, and he wants you to talk a little bit more about Benjamin Netanyahu and just his mindset, motivation, influences. What's going on there?
Well, It's a good question. There's a lot of speculation.
You can talk about his wife a little bit?
Oh, yeah. I think what I would say is I would encourage everyone to read Israeli press because there's a lot. Read from his constituents themselves and what's being published in the opinion sections of Haaretz and the Times of Israel and the Jerusalem Post. And there's a lot of different speculation around what it is that's motivating him. And I think probably part of it is most likely the obvious answer, which is power. And I think he thinks that the way that he hangs on to power is by doing exactly what he's doing. Now, if that's only time will tell.
Any other questions? Any questions we can? So while we're thinking of one, what's that?
Oh, go ahead.
No, I just mean the press is, you talk about what goes on, but our perceptions are so guided by what we're told.
Yeah, that there's a lot of filtering and persuading
And
going
that's what
on in the American press on what's right. Oh, yeah.
That's what I also mean by information ecosystem. And so I'm trying to say that too, because it's also influencers who have a platform who aren't press, but they might have more influence than some press.
All right, Cyril.
And how the algorithms work.
So my question's similar to that. It seems to me that, here we are, we're all educated, we all think about the thinking process and all that, but it seems to me that we're at a point in our history where we're either relying more on misinformation or our emotions for our decisions rather than a more thorough analysis. Is that just because there's too much information coming at us or the wrong information, or is it just an emotional state that we're in?
We're being targeted by so many different people who are trying to sway us. I mean, it's hard to, if you think about it for a second, if you didn't have your iPhone or you didn't have your computer that's in the form of a phone with you, how would you go about your day even? And then when I think, so it's, and you, even if you weren't to do that and you were to sit down in a lunch conversation, have somebody who was on their phone for the past 4 to 5 hours and they're bringing it up with you and you're getting swayed by your friend or your family member or your boss or your colleague who's taking a spin on something that you then just heard, and then all of a sudden it's there with you and so it's this moment that we're in that I think we have to figure out how to navigate. And that includes thinking about when we've gone down the rabbit hole, which we all do on a social media site or something. What am I being, or what are we being exposed to? How are we feeling? Kind of really developing that muscle to check in. And also, that's why I'm going back to facts and evidence and to say, what is the process of saying, like, what do we actually know? What do we not know? What do we need to get in order to know? And just going through this checklist and this process with us and being disciplined about it and learning that so that we ourselves can navigate this in a way that is civilized.
But the problem is, I hear all the time, people do not know where to go to get unbiased news that hasn't been filtered or slanted or, hey, here's what happened and here's what you're supposed to think about it. Where do you go to get, here's the data.
Admittance is the first step. So I think it's actually even just admitting it. It's like, I don't know. I don't know. So I'm being told this, but is it true? Is it right? And then just sort of saying, okay, where would I go about verifying that? So, and then how do I live with perhaps the doubt? And so and with time, also because we're so used to getting answers right now that sometimes knowing takes time.
While we're waiting for another question, so you mentioned third-party contenders, and I was sitting in the back with our audio guys, both of whom are under 25, and I mentioned Ross Perot, and they were like, who? Is there not a Ross Perot in the wings who can at least split the vote of one of the parties?
I think so.
You want to elaborate on that?
Oh, yeah, I mean, I think maybe we'll see it on the Democratic side. I think, let's see how Cornel West is going to do, and let's see how Stein is going to do. So, and Dean Phillips.
With respect to the border, you mentioned the illegal trade, guns, drugs, and general economic trade. But what about the security risks of people coming in that might be terrorists and things like that?
Well, that's what I mentioned in terms of you need to know who's coming into your country, and you need to know who's going out. And with us not knowing that increases the security risk. Also trafficking, labor trafficking and sex trafficking too. So all of those things that are taking place, I think that we do need to be concerned about it, but we also need to see, I think, and say, what is the latest technology that we have on the border? Why are we missing that?
But if you believe any of the numbers that have been reported, I mean, you're talking about potentially, hundreds of thousands, if millions of people that have come in, and so that is, whether you're tracking them or I don't know how you could track that many, that is terrifying to people in both parties, especially when you see it showing up in cities, and then just the reality that we're going to have another 9/11 or another awful attack at some point. And then what will that mean, and what will people think then?
Well, I think I agree that we need to be very serious about this. I also think it's not a magic wand solution. It's not one thing. It's also how our systems are speaking to each other. It's also about how intelligence that we have is being run up the flagpole as well. So you could have that information even, but if it's not in the right on the right person's desk, you might still not be safe. And so I think we need to take a holistic approach, is what I'm trying to say, in terms of like, how well is our security systems working? How much are we relying on technology? How much are we relying on law enforcement on the border? How are they communicating with each other? How is the interaction between technology? For those of you who work in healthcare, I think we can say that we're trying to also make sure that the technology that's advancing different healthcare options are not always communicating in real time with what the doctor needs too, and there can sometimes be, or the nurse practitioner, there can sometimes be that disconnect too, and we're seeing that as well. So you might, because let me just say this, like I've seen one of the systems that has the data and that has the information, and it's complex. And then once you have that information, who do you then communicate it to? And are you making sure that you're doing that in real time? And how again, going back to this other point, but how are local, state, and federal agencies all getting along together as well as you're trying to troubleshoot that too? So a lot goes into it. But these are the types of conversations I think we should be having, rather than, are you for X or are you for Y? And rather than just sort of introducing some of the complexities around this. But I'll also just say about the demand, again, and immigration reform. I have been hearing about immigration reform for almost 2 decades now. We're a very talented public in society. Can we not figure out what we need from an immigration standpoint in order to make sure that people that we do need to have in the country for a whole variety of reasons, because many of us came here as immigrants as well for a variety of reasons, that there is a pathway for that?
All right, Jay, let's go back. I know one in the back, one down here. So, in the back corner. I see David. Okay.
You said a lot about delay with Trump on the trials. The trial on the classified documents. The documents in the White House are very clearly marked and ordered and structured. Even if he were able to delay that, and that's the first question, will he be able to delay that? The second one is, if he were elected, that would not stop that process, would it?
He can probably stop that process. There are pathways for him to stop it. It's easier for him to stop it in the federal courts than the state courts, but there is a potential pathway for him to stop it. Now, the Supreme Court would probably rule on that because there's not a ruling as to whether or not what he will try to do with the state courts, whether or not that is legal or not, but that won't stop him from doing it. And I think that I think the delay tactics are probably going to work, but I could be wrong.
That one is a federal only case, though, and it probably has to do with the ruling on whether has immunity for all crimes that's coming up.
There's still other ways he can delay. That was one of the tactics that he used, but there are other tactics in his toolbox that he can still introduce to delay.
All right, time for a few more.
Do you think we'll be here next year talking about China?
Yes, probably.
What do you think is going to happen?
I think we still don't know. I think they are holding their cards very close to their vest. Let's see what we end up doing with Taiwan this year. There's a lot in play there. So I think that it's too soon to tell what the conversation around it will be. But I think just kind of given how things are moving, there will be some move most likely made that we'll want to come back and talk about.
And in 24, and you're talking specifically about Taiwan?
Yes. Yeah.
So you think that will happen?
I think that there's so much pressure right now that let me put it this way, we will see whether or not if we do something, but there's a lot of pressure right now to send and to get involved with Taiwan. We already, to some extent, already are. Nancy Pelosi, for example, went there last year. I think that there's a lot in play for a lot of different political figures with Taiwan, and the question just will be, how does China respond? I think that I want to be clear, I'm not talking about us being at war with China. I'm simply saying I think that China will continue to flex its muscles in ways that we will want, and also it's going to be thinking about us as someone who's meddling in its backyard, that it's going to want to make sure that it's sending signals to as well. And there's a number of different ways in which it can do that, including in terms of where Ukraine-Russia goes.
Samar, Barbara Schneider, online viewers, asked this question, and she says, regarding division in America, some states have all-party primaries, and then the top two vote-getters have a runoff. What do you think of this idea as perhaps having a moderating influence on our elections, our candidate selection?
I didn't quite catch the question.
Okay. She just says that some of our states have all-party primaries,
right?
And then the two top vote getters have the runoff. What do you think of that?
Great idea. I think that this is great again for me. I think it's great for us to be exploring a lot of different ways for people's voices to be heard in terms of who they want. That's not locked into a very rigid and strict two-party primary-based system.
All right, come down here to Robert. Nice questions only.
I'll say about the press, I suggest people watch Washington Journal on C-SPAN. Every morning it's a call-in show, and they have experts on both sides of issues. And in particular,
what time does it come on?
It comes on at 7 in the morning, and they'll have an issue, and they will have an expert on that issue, and you can call in and ask them a question. And then they will also have two people, one on each side. So in specific, on the Israel-Palestine issue, on January the 26th, there's a man named Michael Duran and Benjamin Friedman. Okay? Now,
what's your question,
my
Robert?
question is this. 26. My question is this: do you think the Biden campaign, like 2016 with Hillary Clinton, is concerned, and in specific, I'm saying because of his perceived unconditional support for Benjamin Netanyahu, that people will sit this election out, and there's such a slim margin of victory nowadays on these Midwestern states, one of which has a really large Arab American population. Do you think they're concerned about that?
Yes. Do I think the Biden administration is concerned? I think they're increasingly concerned. I think their concern is growing, and it should be.
Do you think that the Biden camp is concerned that there seem to be more and more Americans, including Democrats, who are very concerned about his age and ability? I mean, our friend John Meacham says he's fine, but you watch him walk to the helicopter, you watch him on TV, and you hear people, not only Republicans and Democrats, that are like, okay, he could finish this term. How could this guy do 4 more years?
Yeah, I always want to be sensitive about this because I I'm so,
it's a hard question.
As a human being, I'm so empathetic for anybody at any age, honestly. And so I just think the aging process is hard for everybody. And that said,
That's going to go really well to church. Let's put that out there.
That said, a lot of people are talking about it, and you're looking at him and you're wondering. A lot of people are wondering, and are seeing this and are saying, "Is he okay?"
You got one more? All right, yeah. Let's bring us home, and we got to wrap up for the night.
Okay. Well, this is expanding on the China conversation. And, obviously, it's a very different situation in China than it's been really for 40 years, because in Xi, you've got a guy who's acting like a typical strong man. And after a couple generations of Chinese leaders who were, by their relative standard, fairly progressive and increasingly progressive. So you've got this guy that's acting like a strong man, but he's also, and that doesn't bode well, but at the same time, you look at a variety of issues, and Taiwan's kind of the poster child, I guess, for the China-centric issues now. You've also got in Xi, you've got a leader who is dealing with a shrinking population, and not in a good way. Be careful what you ask for, because they've got a massive demographic bomb getting ready to blow up in their face. It already is blowing up in their face. Their historic practice over the last 50 years of letting the bankers and the real estate developers kind of do whatever they darn well please, and we'll sort it out at the end. It's gotten to a scale where, particularly with the real estate and the banks that back the real estate developers, he's got massive domestic financial issues. As he's fighting wars that his predecessors haven't had to fight internally, does that make him more strident and more likely to pick a fight in Taiwan, to distract everyone from the fact that, no, China's not this economic wonder anymore, its economy is shrinking, wages are dropping, they've got all these problems? Is he likely to default to become more strident, or might he turn his focus domestically, which is what most Chinese leaders have done, because they realize that the most important thing is to stay in power, and so you need harmony? Long question, sorry.
Yeah, so I would say, I'm not an expert on China, and so I would say there are people who can come in who study this 24/7, and that I can recommend, Brett Benson being one of them. I think he'd be a great speaker on this topic. He eats, breathes, I don't know if you know him, but he eats, breathes, and sleeps this subject, and he studies Taiwan-China relations and also alliances. He's fantastic. He's a professor in political science at Vanderbilt. But if I were to start my research around that, I would look more into the former scenario than the latter that you laid out, more strident. That would be my initial inclination, and then I would. Yeah.
All right, I want to thank everybody for being here. Thanks for your questions. lots we've covered, lots we still could cover. Let's thank Samar Ali.
Thank you guys. Thank you so much. Thank you.
She's always very honest, I think balanced, fair, and it's great to have you, and we'll keep having you back.
Thanks for inviting me.
Of course, these things are always changing and evolving, so thanks for being here.
You never leave me without feeling exhausted and in deep thought.
That's our goal when you come. No, thank you for answering the hard questions. Next week is Ash Wednesday, 6:30 in the sanctuary, and then that'll kick off Lent. So a lot's coming up. Have a great night and go in peace. Thanks, everybody.